All right. So my name is Salil Lachke. I'm an associate professor and an associate chair in the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of Delaware. And the provocative title of my presentation today is Research is Not Good Enough and Planning for Successful Federal Grant Applications. Now, of course, that does not mean research is not good enough, really. I mean, it is. Research is obviously the basis of why we will apply for grants to do more of that. But really, we need to go beyond just getting data collected and so on and so forth. And that's the kind of main message that I want to give today. Okay, so before I go into what my messages are, I want to just point out to my own successes and failures at getting grant applications. And this is really not to, showcase how much money I have brought in or anything like that, but it's really to give a summary of what worked and what didn't work. So since I started writing grants around to the exact date, probably 9 years ago, I have brought in around $5 million. Okay, I have been able to get multiple R01 grants, some on their first attempt, some that have been awarded even on renewals for 5 years instead of the usual 4 years. And then there have been some wild card sort of grant applications like the Pew Charitable Trusts or some foundation monies and here and there that I could get. Now, why could I do this? Okay, that's really the reason I want to give this presentation. And of course, data and research is at the heart of it, but one has to go beyond that. Okay, and let's see what are the main points that I would like to discuss today. First and foremost, you have to identify the most appropriate program for your research and contact your program officer. Now, whether this can be at NIH or NSF or the DoD, which is the Department of Defense or Army or such, it could be any of these. But I think it's really fundamental to contact program officers. And we'll get into that. I will try to expand on each of these points in the next few minutes over the next few slides. Second important point is that you have to plan on at least two research projects, okay, which can be really under your umbrella of your sort of broader research aspects of your project or research goals. But really, I think you have to at least put your bets on at least two of them, or and if possible more. But again, there has to be a balance as to not sort of diluting yourself here as well, especially in your early years. Third is to really strategize the submission of your applications. And by this, I again mean which study section it should go to, how to write it in a way that it goes to the right study section in the right institute. Also, that means, how to strategize the timing of it and such. Okay. The fourth point is that probably the most important in some sense is you have to show yourself, you have to attend the key research conferences in your area all the time, I would say, and keep yourself out there. You are the best advocate for your research, okay? And study section reviewers, even if you don't know them personally, they would recognize your name from an abstract or a presentation or an oral presentation in a meeting, and that really does give, when things are all tied up and all the scores are there is a tiebreaker there, that comes to your advantage. Okay, and the fifth thing on the agenda that I cannot really stress enough is that you have to publish your research. Okay, and there are some ways as to how to strategize that as well. But really, successful grant applications is not just writing one nice piece of proposal. Obviously, that is important. That is the key. That is really where, I mean, that's the make or break of it, right? If you don't have a good, well-written, well thought out proposal with well flushed out specific aims and all that, there is no chance that that will get funded. But in addition to that, you need all of these things. So let's try to expand on each one of them briefly through these next few minutes, okay? So first is contact your program officer. Now, I just want to make a contrast between the National Science Foundation, NSF, versus the NIH. And NSF program officers, actually, people don't know this as much, is that they actually have a lot of say into what their programs get fund. Okay, so we have an advantage that we are just really less than 2 hours away from Washington, D.C., and one can really just drive to NSF, seek out an appointment, and these folks are really very eager to meet you guys, especially the younger folks, learn of what your research is about. And a lot of them are really helpful in trying to identify whether it fits into their program or any other program at NSF. So I have to give a disclaimer that I never got any dollar from NSF, because the moment they see my cataract and medically oriented research and the fact that I have got funding from NIH, they try to fund other folks who don't have that really, and who are not that clinically inclined, let's just say that. But that doesn't mean one shouldn't try. And I myself have driven down to DC, and I found these conversations really rewarding. And I could help other colleagues of mine who had more sort of fundamental research as to how to go about submitting applications to their programs. Okay, so I would say that even if you are doing a clinically important study, try to see if there is a basic aspect to it. Okay, some fundamental aspect that maybe NSF could be interested in funding, and certainly do that phone call or that 2-hour trip. Really, it would be worth it to learn more about NSF. Okay, so that's one. Okay, and the second is, of course, NIH. And this is a little tricky because NIH program officers, as I was saying in the slide, are not as powerful, if you will, as an NSF program officer. But what they are really, really useful for are to really see what the agency, any particular institute in that agency is trying to focus on. Like, for example, the request for applications, or RFAs as they are called, right? So these are applications where the agency has really identified an area of research that they want to pour money in. They have also allocated money for it many a times. And there is a real focus on funding those kind of applications. So one has to be forever on a lookout for whether your research can fit into a particular RFA. If it does, one has to call up that program officer and really again learn more about what they are expecting. And a lot of these folks again are very interested in funding the best applications. Okay, so this doesn't mean that the application, again, I want to stress that the applications have to be excellent. Okay, they can't be subpar. But at the end of the day, because there are going to be so many excellent applications, and you want to be able to really, be standing, or sort of showcasing yourself better than the others, one has to be sort of, visible to all of these folks. Okay, so here the NIH officer can also help out when, say, your application is reviewed but not funded, which happens most of the time, right? So that in that scenario, the program officer at NIH can be very helpful in providing really feedback as to what was discussed. Sometimes it's not very easy to read into the reviews. Okay, it seems like there is not much wrong with the grant, but yet you got a bad score or non-fundable score, that is. And the NIH officer can really shed some light into that as to really what was the key problem that people didn't like, or what could have been done better. So I think really having this relationship with program officer at NIH is going to be really important, even though those guys cannot really, have the same level of shots, calling of shots as an NSF program officer. Now, the other thing to remember is that if your grant gets a fundable score, then the NIH program officer actually can be an advocate for your particular grant, and the fact that it could be funded for not less but more years. Some of these NIH grants can get funded not from even the usual 4 years. It can be funded to, one of my colleagues had got a grant funded for just 3 years, and that's not setting them up for much success, because really how much can you do in 3 years that you can renew it? Okay, so really the program officer's relationship and the showcasing of your research to them and showing them and convincing them how that's important is really key in making that decision, that maybe this grant merits funding for 4 years or maybe even 5 years, which sets you up for success for the next sort of round of renewals and so forth. Okay. So then let's go on to planning on multiple research projects. Now, this is of course subjective to really individuals and their research projects, but really, as I said in my introduction, one has to really think about at least 2 related research projects under your sort of broader scientific interests. And they need to be convincingly separate in a sense that either they are two different genes or two different really approaches or such, but one has to be able to say that these are not overlapping sort of, projects, okay, but they are connected. So think about that when you start thinking about collecting data or conceiving of projects and such. And of course, this you have heard multiple times, so this is a cliche, but plans months, if not years ahead. And the key part that I would like to introduce newly here, if this is not what has been taught before or not been discussed before, is that practice this planning work ethic throughout your career. Especially if you are well funded, I would say, because if you are well funded, then the expectations that you're going to get you are going to get your research published as also high. Okay, and when people look at your previous funding, they expect your productivity to be as high as the funding sort of warrants. Okay, so really, when I get a grant, I'm not kidding. I don't really, I cannot exaggerate this. If the grant started this year, I'm seriously thinking 5 years from now as how I'm going to renew this grant. And really, one has to plan really years in ahead, if not months ahead. Okay, of course, this may not apply for younger folks, early investigators who are just starting out, but still, I would say that not getting complacent is a very important, message that I like to give. So let's go on to the third point, strategizing the submission of applications. Now, this is also really important. Okay, one can again have the best data, the best sort of written grant and everything, but it goes to the wrong study section. It's really going to not get a high score. Okay, so one has to really identify the most appropriate study section for your research. And this point goes along with identifying the appropriate program and the program officer. And sometimes these guys will be, not sometimes, many a times they will be helpful in identifying the right program for your research. So that's very key. Okay, so it goes again hand in hand with the program officer. The other thing that people sometimes overlook is that when they do identify a certain study section, one has to look into the members of the study section and make sure that you don't have any professional relationship, or you're not going to start a professional relationship with these folks. Because if you do, then maybe somebody who likes your research or such are automatically not, identified for reviewing your grant. Okay, and so really, and sometimes your grant can get really, if there are considerable sort of overlaps with study section members or relationships or such, they can get sort of dodged into some other study section that is less than optimal. So you want to make sure that the study section members are also somebody that you have maybe collegial relationships with in your research area, but not somebody that you have a formal collaboration and such going. Okay. Another thing I would say is that do not submit suboptimal applications to the most appropriate study section. And what I mean by that is you have and of course a reputation to lose, which means that really you want to go with your strongest foot forward to the best study section, that the most appropriate study section that is for your research, because these folks are going to remember your applications, and if they are strong applications that didn't get fundable score in the previous cycle, they're going to remember that. Okay, and if they were just weak applications, then they may not be taking folks seriously the next time around as well. This is just human nature, so one has to be very careful as to when they submit these applications, and they have to be strong. Okay. The other thing is that you also, and this is a point that also one has to diligently practice, is that you can find out who are the strong players in your area, and you can also see when their applications, when their grant renewals are due, and when they may be able to, when they are putting their grant in the same cycle. And you don't want to go in the same cycle, if possible, if that information is known. All of these are small things, one might say, but cumulatively, they're going to be important for really maximizing your success. Because again, remember that any cycle that the study section reviews grants for, you're going to get reviewed with your peers in that particular cycle. So one has to look into that. The fourth point is showcasing your research in conferences. Again, identify the appropriate conferences you expect your members of your study sections to and your program officers to attend these. Try to showcase a poster or an oral presentation and such. And of course, an important point is you cannot directly discuss your application with study section members. This is a federal offense, right? But you can discuss your research findings, which can be the basis of your application, but you can't really discuss aim 1, aim 2, aim 3 or such, but you can certainly discuss your research and the importance of it, and really use this platform sometimes to even directly address some criticism of your grant or such. If there was a control that was mentioned to not be appropriate, try to convince folks who come to your poster or oral presentations that this is why this is an appropriate control, or why a certain approach is correct or not. Okay. And then, of course, the most important is that publishing your research. We live in an era where NIH really just wants to fund folks who have the highest chance of getting success. Okay, and I almost jokingly call it as a voucher system. And the reason I call it that is because there is just so much preliminary data that one has to collect. It's almost like saying, like, look, I have got all these data, all these results and everything, and now can you just pay me for what I've done, really? And of course, in some ways, that's what it is. Okay, so one has to really focus on getting high quality preliminary data. Again, that requires planning months ahead, if not years. Okay. And of course, the most important thing is that you have to show a product at the end of the at the end of the day. And so you want to strategize your publications, even if you are not funded right now. If you just started a lab, think about maybe a technique or a technology paper or a reagent paper or a cell line characterization or something that you're going to use for your application, and try to publish on it. Even if it is not the most highest impact paper, your publications show that you are independent, you have arrived, and you're ready to do all this work if they give you the money. Okay. So the last point is, of course, no other message will help more than the following: publish, publish, publish your research. It is a feed forward loop. Really, publications lead to grants. Grants lead to showcase of productivity, and then of course that leads to more publications, and then that leads to more grants. Okay, so that's my spiel on this, and I'll be happy to take questions. Thank you.